Morning, Trainiacs. I want to take a bit of a break from your regularly scheduled endurance training program to talk about the Garmin Rally pedals. Now, full disclosure, as you can see back there, Garmin is a sponsor of the channel. But when I was working out the sponsorship with Garmin, I specifically left out of that sponsorship power pedals. And the reason for that is because when the sponsorship between Garmin and I came up, their Vector power pedals, their version 1, their version 2, their version 3 were, even as some Garmin people told me like fairly publicly without secret, they're like, yeah, the Vector pedals aren't really something that we are tremendously happy with right now, and they're being redone. So they ended up actually coming out with the Garmin Rally pedals. These are the Rally pedals for a road bike. These are the Rally pedals for a gravel bike or a mountain bike. And even in some of their own product announcement collateral, they said that a lot of the issues that were common to the Garmin Vector power pedals have been fixed with these Garmin Rally pedals. That's part of the reason why they're not the Vector 4, they're the Rally. They want to get away from that Vector name. So now while Garmin is technically a sponsor of this channel and our team, they aren't really a sponsor of these power pedals. I can choose to use these or not. They have no say over whether or not I actually use these pedals. But they want to send them out because they really do believe that they alleviated some of those issues with the Vector pedals. Now I've been using these Garmin Rally XC pedals on my gravel bike for probably around 6 months, basically the entire year. I've used these road pedals for the last 2 months as I've gone out and started doing some tri-bike riding. And I can tell you that night and day, the things that I heard that were bad about the Vector pedals, I haven't experienced any of that. So let's get into this. Two of the most common complaints that I heard with the Garmin Vector pedals were, first, that the power was wildly off, and I can attest to this. There was actually a friend who, when we would put the power down and do like a 10 or 20 minute max effort interval, he would always ride away from me. And we're about the same weight we were at the time when we were riding together. We were right coming in at that 160 pounds, and he would always ride away from me. And we were still both in the aero position, so theoretically he should have been putting out more power. Now at the time, I would have been putting out power that was like 270 watts. His Vector pedals, the original version, were reading 170 watts, like wildly off. The other scenario that again I can attest to is that the Garmin Vector pedals were so specific with how much you needed to tighten it that I had a friend that when we were traveling to Half Ironman Campeche in Mexico, she had to travel with her own torque wrench that if the torque that the pedals were tightened to were off by as much as like 1 Newton meter, it would read as much as 40 watts off. Like it was wildly off. And that was the big thing that I wanted to test when I first started riding these. So I first started riding on the Garmin Rally XC pedals, the cross country, the off-road, gravel bike, mountain bike, what have you pedals. And what I ended up doing was I've got a pretty good sense of what an appropriate power is depending on how it feels. I would actually end up riding blind and doing some efforts without looking at the power, thinking that I was holding somewhere around 210 watts, targeting roughly that. And in the end, I would look down and see where my power was, and it was basically exactly right in line with what I would have expected. Give or take certainly a few percentage points, and whether I'm off or the power's off, I would actually argue that I was off in what I was guessing, but it's not off by 100 watts or 40 watts. Also, what I've done to see how finicky these pedals were or how robust they were and versatile they were, if they needed to be treated with kid gloves and very carefully, finely tuned. I ended up installing a lot of these actually just with hand tension, because that's about as far off as you can possibly get from the tension that you should have, and seeing if it affected the power reading. And sure enough, with just hand tension and a calibration at the start of the ride, it was, again, pretty much bang on. I also did a few rides in cold weather, in hot weather. That was something that in my old power pedals, the PowerTap P1s and the PowerTap P2s, that would be off by about 40 or 50 watts if I went and calibrated it one day where it was really hot and then I rode the next morning where it was really cold. That wasn't the case. It was maybe off by 10 would have been my guess, but it was so small that it was unnoticeable with the Garmin Rally pedals. Now, while we're on the topic of bringing out the PowerTap pedals, these are the PowerTap P1s. I also had the PowerTap P2s, but comparing the two, you can see that the PowerTap P1s are a much bulkier pedal than the Garmin SPD style rally pedal that if you didn't know that it had power in it, you wouldn't actually know that it's a power pedal. So one issue that I used to have with these large PowerTap P1s is if I was taking a corner when I was road cycling really fast, I could actually clip the corner. And when you clip the bottom of these pedals, as this has happened once, there you go, you can actually bring the spindle that's on the inside out of place. In addition to that, these weigh almost 200 grams per pedal. These are about 165 grams per pedal. So it's just a much slighter build. Like, it's a much more practical build. And I would say that the PowerTap P1s I really love for their robustness to be able to go from one bike to another really quickly. But the Vector pedal I just couldn't believe in. The Rally pedal I 100% believe in. I've swapped this out from one bike to the next, rode it from one day to the next, do a quick recalibration, and boom, done. But it's not all total sunshine and rainbows. There are three small but certainly worth mentioning situations that I think you need to be aware of if you're thinking about getting these pedals. The first one is that you cannot take these out with an Allen key just into the spindle. It's actually blocked off. And the reason that I imagine this is because some of the guts for the power pedal are actually inside of there. So you have to have a pedal wrench or a small enough wrench, just a standard wrench, to actually get in and take out these pedals. Unfortunately, I had a wrench to take this off, but I have always preferred to use an Allen key through the spindle. The next thing is that specifically with the XC pedals, the off-road pedals, adjusting the tension for the cleat of clipping in was a real learning experience. Now it's got the indication here of you turn it this way, you go righty-tighty, and it gets a little bit tighter and you're gonna have a harder time unclipping, and lefty-loosey, or you are gonna have more play and it's gonna be easier for you to slip out. Well, how every single one of these threads and screws ended up coming out of the box was it was so tight that I ended up basically just turning the Allen key about a quarter turn one way or another, thinking that that was the maximum amount of play that I had because it got so tight that I didn't want to break or strip the threads on this. What I ended up doing at one point was I got so frustrated with the lack of adjustability in that, like I had so much play that my foot was just constantly unclipping, that I turned it, it cracked, and I thought that I actually broke the nut in here, but what happened was it just basically broke all of the connections or the tightness, or maybe they used Loctite to actually set this screw. But that actually then gave me the ability to have that play. So if you are in the situation where you're like, I just can't adjust the clips in this, feel a little bit dangerous and know that you've got to basically break that seal to actually get the adjustability to happen. And then the third thing that I'll point out on the Rally XC pedals is I'm starting to get a little bit of rust here. Now, I've had this for less than a year, and I will admit that these pedals were sitting in behind the vehicle as we drove to Calgary and back, so we're talking, I think, roughly about 2,000 kilometers, but it's not like I drove through a monsoon or a rainstorm and we're starting to get a little bit of rust on that. I mean, that can be brushed off. It hasn't affected any of the components, any of the performance of this. It's just a little bit like one guy in our group actually noticed it and pointed it out last week and he's like, dude, really? Already? Yeah. So if you're wondering about buying these, I would say yes, but a couple of the housekeeping tasks of what your options are going to be. You're gonna have a single-sided or a double-sided. You're also going to have cycling dynamics or no cycling dynamics. You also have the ability to retrofit a current Garmin SPD pedal into a power pedal. So the range in prices is going to be as little as around $700 all the way up to $1,200 to $1,300. It's right in line with what all good power pedals are costing these days. So if you're just wondering, hey, should I even consider these? I would say yes. Now, if you're thinking about buying the Garmin Rally pedals and you found this helpful in your buying decision, we put a lot of work into this. Like I say, about 6 months of testing before I could feel like I had an actual confident opinion on this. So lots of work, and as a thank you, I'd love if you hit the like button below. If you want to dive more into the nitty-gritty details of exact testing, exact parameters for this, DC Rainmaker does the best job at that, and I'll link to his review of these pedals over there. With that, later, Trainiacs.